she knocked once. 7 years, 2 months, and 11 days, and she knocked once. The way you knocked when you weren't sure you had the right to knock at all. The house looked different. New paint. Different mailbox. A porch light that hadn't been there before. Burning yellow in the November morning, even though the sun was already up. She hadn't known what she would find. She hadn't let herself think about it on the bus, or in the shelter the night before, or in the 7 years of nights before that, when thinking too specifically about this moment had been the thing most likely to make the other moments unbearable. She'd just come. The door opened, a man. Tall, late 50s, the kind of face that had earned its lines. He was holding a boy on his hip. Not carrying him the way you carried a small child. The way you held someone who had fallen asleep and needed to be moved. The boy was 10 years old and too big to be held like that, and was being held like that anyway. The boy opened his eyes. He looked at her. She looked at him. He had her mouth, her mother's eyes. 7 years older than the photograph she'd carried in her shoe for 2 years. And then in the lining of her jacket for 5, he said one word. Not a question, not uncertain, just her. The man holding him went very still. She put her hand over her mouth. Not to stop herself from crying, to stop herself from making a sound that would frighten her son. The bus from the Eastern Correctional Institution to Baltimore took 2 hours and 40 minutes. Mia Coleman had timed it, not on the ride out, on the rides in her head, the ones she'd taken every night for the last year. When she knew the date was coming and couldn't stop her mind from running the route, Highway 50 West to 97 North, the interchange at Annapolis. The specific way Baltimore appeared on the horizon when you came in from the east, not dramatic, just suddenly there, the city materializing out of the flat Maryland landscape like it had been waiting. She'd grown up in that city. She'd left it in the back of a police car at 27. She came back on a Greyhound at 34 with a plastic bag of belongings, $200 in gate money, and a photograph of a 3-year-old boy in the left pocket of a jacket that was 2 sizes too big because it had been donated, and donated things didn't always fit. The photograph was worn at the edges. She'd carried it in her shoe for the first 2 years, not because she was afraid someone would take it, because keeping it against her skin was the closest thing to keeping him close that the rules allowed. Then a corrections officer had told her she could keep it on her person, and she'd moved it to the jacket lining, sewn into a small pocket she'd made herself with thread from the craft room. 7 years. The photograph hadn't changed. Marcus had. She knew this. She'd done the math so many times it had stopped being math and become something else. A fact she carried in her body the way you carried a wound that had healed wrong. He'd been 3 when she left. He was 10 now. 3rd grade becoming 4th. Baby teeth gone. The round softness of his 3-year-old face sharpened into something she couldn't fully picture because she hadn't been there to watch it happen. She'd tried to stay present in the only way available. Letters. She'd written 1 a month. Every month, 7 years, 84 letters. She'd written them on whatever paper the facility provided, sometimes lined notebook paper, sometimes the backs of forms, once on a paper bag, because the commissary had run out and she'd refused to skip that month. She'd written about small things, mostly. What she was learning. Books she'd read. The garden program she'd joined in year 3, where she'd learned that tomatoes needed more water than you thought and less sun than you thought, and that the gap between what a plant needed and what you assumed it needed was where most of them died. She'd written about the women she knew, the ones who had kids the same age as Marcus, the conversations they had about who their children were becoming without them. She'd written, I think about what you smell like. I can't remember anymore, and that scares me more than anything else. She'd written, your Aunt Denise sends me pictures when she can. You lost your front teeth. You look exactly like my brother did at your age, and my brother grew up to be a good man, so I'm not worried. She'd written, I know you probably have questions. I have them too. We'll answer them together when I get home. Home. She'd used that word for 7 years without examining it too closely. Home was the apartment on Fulton Avenue. Home was Denise and the kitchen that smelled like the coconut oil Denise used for everything. Home was Marcus in the mornings before school, slow and warm and resistant to waking, the specific dead weight of a sleepy 3-year-old who wanted 5 more minutes. She hadn't known, writing those letters, that home had changed. She hadn't known because nobody had told her. Denise had died in November 2021. A car accident on the BW Parkway, a Tuesday afternoon. Nothing dramatic and nothing fair and nothing that made sense. She died. And Mia's name hadn't been on a notification list because Mia was incarcerated and the system that was supposed to connect those two facts hadn't. Mia had found out 3 weeks ago. Not from the facility. From another woman, Tanisha, who was from Baltimore too, and whose cousin had known Denise, who had heard it somewhere in the specific, informal network of information that moved through a women's correctional facility the way information moved through any closed community, sideways and slow, and not always accurate, but this time accurate. 2 years. Denise had been gone 2 years, and Mia had spent those 2 years writing letters that began, "Tell Marcus I love him," and addressing them to an apartment where nobody was home anymore. She didn't know what had happened to Marcus after Denise died. She knew the foster care system existed. She knew what it did to children. She'd been in it herself for 8 months at 13, after her mother's hospitalization, long enough to understand that the system was full of people trying and full of gaps between the trying. She didn't let herself think about Marcus in those gaps. She just came. The Greyhound pulled into the Baltimore bus terminal at 11:15 a.m. She sat in her seat after everyone else had gotten off. Not from paralysis. From the understanding that once she stood up and walked off this bus, the next thing would happen, and the next thing after that. And at some point in that chain of next things, she was going to find out where Marcus was and what had happened, and whether the 7 years of letters she'd written had gone anywhere, or had just stacked up in a dead apartment on Fulton Avenue, waiting for someone to throw them away. She stood up. She got off the bus. She went to the shelter that the reentry coordinator had arranged. A bed, a meal, a case manager named Patricia, who had given her a bus pass and a list of resources and had looked at her with the specific, professional warmth of someone who had done this many times and still meant it. She'd slept 3 hours. At 6 in the morning, she'd taken the bus to Fulton Avenue. Not because she thought Denise would be there, because it was the only address she had. Because Marcus had lived there, and things left traces. And she needed a place to start that was connected to him, even if the connections was 2 years old, and she didn't know what she'd find. She'd stood on the sidewalk outside the house for 4 minutes. New paint, different mailbox, a porch light burning in the November morning. She'd walked up the steps. She'd knocked once. The 84 letters were in the plastic bag from the facility, folded inside a manila envelope she'd sealed with tape because the envelope had been sitting in her cell for the last month, and she hadn't wanted them to come apart. 84 letters her son had never read. She'd knocked once, and the door had opened, and Marcus had said her name. James Whitfield had left the porch light on since 1981. Not this porch, every house, every apartment, every place he'd lived since he was 8 years old, and his father had walked out the front door of their row house on Gilmore Street and not come back that night. His mother had left the porch light on every night for 11 years. Not because she believed Raymond Whitfield was coming home. She'd stopped believing that sometime in year 2, James thought, though she'd never said so direct. She left it on because turning it off felt like giving up on something she wasn't ready to give up on. And because James was watching. And because some things you did for your children, even when you did them for yourself, his father had come home. Year 11, James was 19. Raymond Whitfield had walked up the front steps of the Gilmore Street row house on a Thursday afternoon in October, looking older than James had expected and smaller. Somehow, the way people looked when you'd been imagining them at full size for a decade, and then saw them in person and understood they were just a man. His mother had opened the door. She hadn't said anything for a long moment. Then she'd said, "Come in, there's food." That was all. James had watched from the stairs. He'd spent 11 years being angry at his father and 11 years watching his mother leave the porch light on. And, in the moment his father walked through the door, he'd understood something he hadn't had language for at 19 and had spent the decades since finding language for. The light wasn't for his father. The light was a decision his mother made every night about who she was going to be. She was going to be someone who left the light on. regardless of whether anyone came home. James left the porch light on now, at every property he owned. It was in the maintenance specifications. Porch and entry lights on from dusk to dawn. No exceptions, no overrides for cost efficiency. His facilities manager had flagged it once as an unnecessary expense across the portfolio. James had looked at the number, had thought about Gilmore Street, had said, leave it. He'd bought the Fulton Avenue property in 2019. Not because of its history, he hadn't known its history. He'd bought it because it was part of a block acquisition for the West Baltimore Revitalization Initiative, a development project he'd funded specifically to build affordable housing in neighborhoods that had been systematically underinvested for decades. The Fulton Avenue house was one of 14 properties on the block. He'd renovated all 14. Kept the affordable housing designation on 12, used 2 as community spaces. He hadn't known a woman named Mia Coleman had lived in the Fulton Avenue house. He hadn't known her sister Denise had raised a boy named Marcus there until 2021. He'd met Marcus 8 months ago, not through the house. Through the after-school program James funded at the community center on Presbury Street, a program for kids in foster care and transitional housing, focused on art and vocational skills. The kind of program James had wished had existed when he was 9 years old and his father was gone and the adults around him were doing their best with limited resources. And that best had sometimes been enough and sometimes hadn't. Marcus had come in on a Tuesday, quiet kid, kept to himself initially, drew constantly, not casually, with the focused intensity of someone who used drawing the way other people used words to process things that didn't have another form yet. James had noticed him the second week. Not because Marcus was remarkable in any way that announced itself, because James had learned, over years of running programs for kids in difficult circumstances, to notice the ones who were very still, not sad necessarily, just contained, holding something they'd learned not to let show. He'd sat next to Marcus one afternoon, hadn't said anything for a while, just watched him draw. "What is it?" James had asked finally. Marcus had looked at the drawing. "A house," he said, with the light on. James had looked at the drawing. A row house. Simple lines, the way a 10-year-old drew architecture. Frontal flat, proportionally uncertain. But the porch light was there. Carefully drawn, the most detailed part of the image. "You like porch lights?" James said. Marcus had thought about it. "My aunt used to leave ours on," he said, "at the old house. So I could see it from the end of the block and know she was still up." He hadn't said anything else. James hadn't pushed. But he'd thought about it for 3 days after. He'd started picking Marcus up on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. Not formally, not through any official arrangement, through the specific informal accumulation of a relationship that happened when an adult showed up consistently for a kid and the kid started to expect it. He'd learned things incrementally. The way you learn things about quiet people. Not through direct questions, but through the small disclosures that happened when someone felt safe enough to let them happen. Marcus's mother was away. That was how he said it initially. "My mom is away." James hadn't pushed on that either. Later, month 3, a Thursday, driving back from the hardware store where Marcus had helped him pick up materials for the community center renovation, Marcus had said, "She's been away since I was 3. I don't really remember her." James had kept his eyes on the road. "Do you want to?" he'd said. Marcus had thought about it for a long time. "I don't know," he said. "I think so. But I don't know what I'd say." "You don't have to say anything," James said. "Sometimes you just need to be in the same room." Marcus had looked out the window. James had thought about Gilmore Street, about his father walking up the front steps, looking smaller than he'd expected. About his mother saying, "Come in. There's food," like it was the only thing there was to say. Maybe it was. He'd started letting Marcus stay over on Friday nights. Not officially. Officially, Marcus was placed with a woman named Gloria on Carey Street, who had been fostering kids for 20 years and who had given James a long, assessing look the first time he'd appeared at her door to pick Marcus up, and then had nodded and handed him a list of Marcus's food allergies and said, "He doesn't like the crusts cut off, but he'll eat them if you don't make a thing of it." Gloria understood what showing up consistently meant. She'd been doing it for 20 years. This morning, Marcus had fallen asleep on the couch at 9 o'clock. the way he sometimes did on the nights when they'd stayed up too late looking at architecture books. Marcus had a thing for buildings, for how they were put together, for the logic of load-bearing walls and why a doorway had to be where it was. And James had carried him to the spare bedroom and then come back downstairs to make coffee. He'd been in the kitchen at 8:47 when the knock came. One knock. He'd noticed that. One knock, not two or three. The kind of knock that wasn't sure of its welcome. He'd gone to the door with his coffee still in his hand. He'd opened it. 30. Something. Plastic bag in one hand. Jacket two sizes. Too big. The look of someone who had been traveling and hadn't slept and was standing on this porch because it was the next thing, and there was no option but the next thing. He'd heard Marcus on the stairs behind him. He'd turned to say, "Go back to sleep," and Marcus had been standing there, 10 years old, sleep warm, one sock on and one sock off, looking at the woman at the door with an expression James had never seen on his face before. Not confusion, recognition, Marcus said. James had gone very still. The woman's hand had gone to her mouth. He'd looked at her. He'd looked at Marcus. He'd looked at the plastic bag in her hand and understood, without knowing any of the specifics, that this woman had come a long way to get to this door, and that whatever she was carrying in that bag was the most important thing she owned. He stepped back. He opened the door wider. "Come in," he said. "There's coffee." She didn't move immediately, not from hesitation. From the understanding that if she moved too fast, something would break. The moment, the morning, the specific, fragile reality of her son standing on a staircase, in a house. She didn't recognize saying a word she'd been hearing in her head for 7 years. She looked at Marcus. He looked at her. He'd grown. She'd known this, had done the math, had tried to picture it, but knowing and seeing were different operations entirely, and her mind was running them simultaneously and failing at both. He had her mouth. She'd noticed that in the first second, and it had undone something in her chest she didn't have a name for. He was wearing one sock. She noticed that too. The left foot bare on the hardwood floor, the right foot in a gray sock with a small hole at the toe. She noticed it the way you notice things when your brain was receiving too much information and was sorting by detail. Because detail was manageable, and the hole was not. One sock. Her son was standing on a staircase with one sock on, and he'd said "Mom" like it was the most natural word in the world, and she was standing on a porch with 84 letters in a plastic bag and her hand over her mouth. The man stepped back, opened the door wider. "Come in," he said. "There's coffee." She looked at him, tall, late 50s. The kind of stillness that came from having seen unexpected things before and having learned that the first move mattered. He was holding a coffee mug and looking at her with an expression she recognized from the case manager at the shelter. Not pity, assessment, trying to understand what this situation required. She looked back at Marcus. He hadn't moved from the stairs. He was watching her the way he'd watched her from his car seat when he was very small, with that specific, total attention of a child who was still deciding whether the world was trustworthy and was using her face as the data. She walked through the door. The house smelled like coffee and wood, and something faintly sweet she couldn't identify. It looked nothing like it had when she'd lived here. Different floors, different walls, different everything. The only thing the same was the shape of it. The way the entry opened into the living room, the angle of the staircase, the window at the landing that let in the morning light. She knew that window. She'd sat in that window with Marcus when he was 2, and they'd watched it snow, and he'd put his palm flat against the glass to feel the cold through it. She stopped in the middle of the room. Marcus came down 2 more stairs. He stopped there. They looked at each other across the distance, 6 feet, maybe 7. The length of 7 years collapsed into the space between a staircase and a front room. "Hi," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "Hi," Marcus said. The man with the coffee mug had moved to the kitchen doorway, giving them space without leaving the room. She noted that. Whoever he was, he understood something about what this moment required. "You're taller," she said. "You look the same," Marcus said. She looked at him. "I don't," she said. "I know," he said, "but you look the same as I remember." She put her hand over her mouth again. Not the same reason as before, different reason. That came from understanding that her son had been carrying a picture of her in his head for 7 years, the same way she'd been carrying a photograph of him in her jacket lining, and that both pictures were 7 years out of date and that they were both looking at the real thing now and finding it both different and exactly right. Marcus, the man said quietly, why don't you go put on your other sock? Marcus looked at the man, then at Mia, then at his bare foot as if he'd forgotten about it. He went back up the stairs. She watched him go. When he was out of sight, she turned to the man. Who are you? She said, not unfriendly. She didn't have room for unfriendly right now. Just direct. The directness of someone who needed information and didn't have the energy to approach it sideways. James Whitfield, he said. I own this house. She looked around the room, at the house that had been her house and was now his house and where her son had just been sleeping on a Friday night. Why is my son here? She said. He stays here on Fridays sometimes, James said. He and we've known each other about 8 months through a program I run. She absorbed that. He's in foster care, she said. Yes, James said. With a woman named Gloria on Carey Street. She's good. He's okay. She heard that he's okay the way she'd been trained in 7 years to hear information that contained the thing it wasn't saying. He was okay because okay was what was available, not because everything was fine, not because a 10-year-old who'd lost his mother and then his aunt and then gone into foster care was not carrying weight that no 10-year-old should carry. Denise, she said. The word came out different from how she'd planned. She'd planned to ask about Denise, to say my sister, and then ask the question in a way that left room for the answer to be something other than what Tanisha had told her, because Tanisha had heard it from someone else, and that someone had heard it from someone else, and information that traveled sideways was not always accurate. She'd been holding on to that. The possibility that Tanisha had been wrong. James looked at her. His expression changed, not dramatic. A small shift, the specific, careful shift of someone who was about to say something they knew, was going to cost the person hearing it something they couldn't give back. You didn't know, he said. It wasn't a question. Nobody told me, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Denise died in November 2021. A car accident. She didn't, it was fast. She wasn't, he stopped. She didn't suffer. She stood in the middle of the room. The room that had been her living room and was now his living room. And where her son had been sleeping, and where she was standing getting told that her sister had been dead for 2 years. And nobody had thought to tell. She didn't cry. Not because she wasn't feeling it. Because crying required a kind of collapse, and she was not going to collapse in a stranger's living room. She was going to stand here and receive this information and stay on her feet because Marcus was upstairs putting on his sock, and she was not going to be on the floor when he came back down. She was his mother. Mothers stayed on their feet. 2 years. Yes, James said. I wrote her letters, Mia said, after she stopped writing back. I thought she was busy. I thought she stopped. She looked at the plastic bag in her hand, at the manila envelope inside it. 84 letters. Some of them addressed to Denise. Tell Marcus I love him. Tell him I'm coming. Denise had been gone for 2 of those years. The letters had been going to an empty apartment. Or to this house. She looked at James. Did you? She started. No, he said. The previous tenant's mail was being returned. I had the post office redirected. I didn't open anything. She nodded. She looked at the staircase. Marcus at the top of it, now in 2 socks, watching. She hadn't heard him come back. She didn't know how long he'd been standing there. She didn't know how much he'd heard. His face told her enough. He came down the stairs slowly this time. He walked across the room. He stood in front of her. He was close enough that she could see the specific brown of his eyes. Her mother's eyes. She'd written that in letter 31. You have your grandmother's eyes. And she would have loved you so much. And he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully read because it was 10 years old and she'd only known the 3-year-old version, and the 10-year-old version had been built from things she hadn't been there for. He reached out. He took the plastic bag from her hand, not to look inside it, just to hold it. So her hands were free. She put her arms around him. He let her. That was the thing. He let her. He didn't hug her back immediately, didn't fold into her the way he had at 3, when he'd climbed her like furniture and fallen asleep on her shoulder. He stood there and let her hold him, his arms at his sides, and after a moment, 3 seconds, maybe 4, He brought one arm up and put it around her waist. One arm. It was enough. It was everything. James Whitfield stood in the kitchen doorway with his coffee mug and looked at the window on the landing where the morning light came in and did not say anything because there was nothing to say. And he understood that some moments were not for the people watching them. James made eggs, not because anyone had asked, because it was 9 in the morning and there was a woman sitting on his kitchen floor who had been on a Greyhound bus the day before, the night before, and at a correctional facility for 7 years before that, and who had not, he was reasonably certain, eaten a real breakfast in a long time. He didn't ask if she was hungry. He just made eggs. Mia had moved from the entryway to the kitchen table at some point. He hadn't seen it happen, had just looked up from the stove, and she was there, Marcus beside her, the plastic bag from the facility on the table between them, like something neither of them knew what to do with yet. Marcus was eating toast, the kind without crusts, because James had cut them off without thinking about it, and then remembered what Gloria had said, "He'll eat them if you don't make a thing of it," and had put the crusts on his own plate instead. Mia was looking at the bag. "You don't have to open it now," James said. She looked up. "There are letters in there," she said. "I wrote them every month." He set a plate in front of her. She looked at it like she'd forgotten what plates looked like in a kitchen that wasn't institutional. 84, she said. He sat down across from her. "He doesn't know about them," she said. Not to Marcus. Marcus had gone to get his sketchbook from the other room. The way he disappeared to get his sketchbook when he needed something to do with his hands, during conversations that were too large to sit inside of without an anchor. "No," James said. "I wrote them and I didn't know where to send them," she said. After Denise, she stopped. "I didn't know about Denise until 3 weeks ago. Someone told me. Not the facility, not anyone official." James looked at his coffee. "That shouldn't have happened," he said. "No," she said. "It shouldn't." She picked up the fork, put it down. "How did he end up here?" she said. "With you. In this house," he told her. The community center program. The Tuesday Marcus had walked in and sat in the corner and drawn for 2 hours without talking to anyone. The drawing of the house with the porch light. The incremental Tuesdays and Thursdays that had accumulated into something neither of them had named, because naming it would have required a category. And there wasn't a clean category for what it was. "He's in foster care with Gloria on Carey Street," James said. "She's been doing it 20 years. She's good. But he's here on Fridays," Mia said. "He's here on Fridays," James said. She was quiet for a moment. "Why?" she said. He thought about how to answer that. The honest answer was layered in a way that required context she didn't have yet. His father, Gilmore Street, 11 years of porch lights, the specific thing that happened when a man who had been a fatherless boy recognized a boy who was somethingless in a way that didn't have a clean name. "Because he needed somewhere consistent," James said. "And I had somewhere consistent." She looked at him, reading him the way she'd been reading people for 7 years, not from suspicion, from necessity. When you had limited information and high stakes, you learned to read what people weren't saying as much as what they were. "You didn't know about me," she said. "Not until this morning," he said. "He didn't tell you," she said. "He told me his mother was away," James said. "I didn't push." She nodded. She understood not pushing. She'd learned it in the same place she'd learned most things in the last 7 years, from watching what happened when you pushed on something that wasn't ready to move. Marcus came back with his sketchbook. He sat next to his mother and opened it on the table between them. She looked at the drawings. Buildings mostly. Houses, interiors, rooms seen from doorways, staircases from below, windows from inside looking out. A series of porch lights, different styles, rendered with more care than anything else on the page. She turned pages slowly. On page 31, she counted. Later she counted. There was a woman. Not her. Not anyone recognizable. A figure drawn from memory or imagination, standing in a doorway, facing out, not facing in. She looked at it for a long time. "Who is this?" she said. Marcus looked at the drawing. "I don't know," he said. "I just kept drawing her." She looked at the figure in the doorway. At the way Marcus had drawn her, not going or coming, just standing in the threshold. Present. Available. There she put her hand flat on the page, not covering the drawing, just touching it. Marcus watched her hand. Then he picked up his pencil. In the corner of the page, small, He wrote something. She looked at it. Mom. One word. In the corner of the drawing he'd been making for months without knowing who it was. She kept her hand on the page. She did not cry. She was not going to cry in front of her son until she understood what crying in front of her son would do to him, what it would require of him, whether he would feel he had to manage it. She didn't know that yet. She didn't know enough about who he was now to know what her tears would cost him. She was going to learn. James got up and refilled his coffee and stood at the counter with his back to the table and gave them the room. Mia, he said. She looked up. What do you need? He said. Not today, in general. What does the next month look like and what's in the way? She looked at him. It was a different question from the ones she'd been asked since getting out. The case manager had asked about housing and employment and program compliance. The shelter intake had asked about history and needs and risk factors. Those were real questions, necessary questions. Nobody had asked what was in the way. The answer was long. She knew it was long before she started because she'd been cataloging it for 7 years, the specific inventory of what a felony conviction did to the practical architecture of a life. Housing. Most landlords ran background checks. Most background checks ended the conversation. Employment. Same. The $200 in gate money covered 3 days if she was careful, and she was always careful, and 3 days was not a month. She had a case manager and a bed and a bus pass and a list of resources. And she'd worked through lists of resources before and knew that lists of resources were not the same as resources. She said the short version. James listened. Not the way people listened when they were waiting to offer solutions. The way people listened when they were actually trying to understand the shape of a problem before they decided what to do about it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The house." She looked at him. "This house," he said. "It was yours. You lived here." "I rented," she said. "I didn't own it." "I know," he said. "I bought the block in 2019. I kept 12 of the 14 properties as affordable housing. This one is one of the 2 I use differently." He paused. "I didn't know someone who'd lived here was going to knock on the door." "Nobody could have known that," she said. "No," he said. He looked at Marcus. Marcus was drawing again, not looking up, pencil moving, the sketchbook open to a new page. Whatever he was drawing fast, the way he drew when something was working. James looked at Mia. "I'm not going to fix everything," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not, this isn't," he stopped, found the right words. "I know what it looks like when someone with money shows up and offers to solve things. I know what that usually means. I'm not offering that." She looked at him. "What are you offering?" she said. "A conversation," he said, "about what actually helps, not what looks like help." He paused. "I've been on the wrong side of that distinction before. I'd like to not be on it again." She was quiet. She looked at Marcus, at the sketchbook, at the drawing he was making. She could see it now, the lines taking shape. A table, 2 people at it, a window behind them with morning light coming through. He was drawing this, right now, this morning, this kitchen. He was drawing it while it was happening, the way people documented things they were afraid of losing. She looked at James. "There's a lawyer," she said. "My public defender told me when I was sentenced there was a motion that could have been filed. Something about the evidence. She didn't have time to file it before I had to decide." She paused. "I've been thinking about it for 7 years." James looked at her. "Post-conviction relief," he said. She looked at him. "My father," he said. "I learned a lot of legal language I didn't want to know." She nodded. "It might not go anywhere," she said. "Probably doesn't. But if there's a chance," she stopped. "Marcus needs a mother who isn't a felon. That's not. I'm not ashamed of what I've been through. But I want to be able to apply for an apartment without the conversation ending before it starts." James looked at his coffee, at the table, at the window with the morning light coming through it. "I know a lawyer," he said. "A good one. The kind who files the motion." She looked at him. "Why would you do that?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My father came home after 11 years. My mother opened the door." He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. She looked at the porch light, still burning yellow through the front window, visible from where she sat. She understood now. Patricia called at 10:30. Mia had forgotten about Patricia. Not forgotten. Had put her in a different category. The category of things that existed, in the world of the shelter and the bus pass and the list of resources, and that world felt very far from this kitchen table where her son was drawing, and a man she'd met 2 hours ago was talking about lawyers. She stepped outside to take the call. The porch, the light still on. November in Baltimore, cold enough to see her breath. The street below quiet, in the way streets were quiet on Saturday mornings when the week had finished and the next one hadn't started. Just checking in, Patricia said. You have the bed through Sunday. Monday we need to talk about next steps. I know, Mia said. Did you find what you were looking for? Patricia said. Mia looked through the front window. Marcus at the kitchen table, pencil moving. James refilling his coffee, saying something that made Marcus look up and almost smile. Not quite, the almost smile of a kid who hadn't decided yet if smiling was safe. Yes, she said. Good, Patricia said. Monday then. She hung up. Mia stood on the porch. She looked at the street, Fulton Avenue, at 10:30 on a Saturday morning. She knew this street, had walked it 1,000 times. To the bus stop on the corner, to the grocery store 3 blocks north, to the park where Marcus had learned to walk, taking 4 steps and sitting down hard and looking up at her with an expression of pure offense, like the ground had personally betrayed him. She'd laughed. She could still hear it. Her own laugh, the specific one that only came out when Marcus did something that was simultaneously alarming and perfect. She hadn't heard that laugh in 7 years. Hadn't had reason to. She was going to need to find it again. She went back inside. James was at the sink. Marcus had moved to the living room floor, sketchbook open, on his stomach, drawing in a specific focused way that meant he was somewhere else now, inside the work, and the adults could talk. She sat at the table. The program, she said. The one Marcus is in, tell me about it. James sat down across from her. He told her. The after-school program had started 4 years ago. Not from a plan. From a specific Tuesday afternoon when James had been at the community center on Presbury Street for a routine check-in and had found 6 kids sitting in a hallway with nowhere to go because the program they'd been attending had lost its funding that morning and the staff had left by noon. He'd stayed. Not because it was his responsibility, because 6 kids were sitting in a hallway. He'd called 2 people, made 3 promises he'd had to figure out how to keep. Had the program running again by Thursday. He'd been running it since. How many kids? Mia said. 34 currently, he said. Mostly foster care, some transitional housing, some just kids who need somewhere to be after 3. And you fund it, she said. I fund it and I show up, he said. Both matter. One without the other doesn't work. She looked at him. My father, James said, when he came home. He had money eventually. He'd worked, he'd saved, he could fund things. But the first year he was back, we didn't have money. We had him showing up. He paused. That was the thing that mattered, not the money. Him being there every day when I got home from school. How long did it take, Mia said, to be okay with him being back? James thought about it honestly. 3 years, he said, to trust it. Another 2 to stop waiting for it to end. She looked at her hands. 5 years. She did the math without meaning to. Marcus was 10. 5 years put him at 15. Old enough that the things she was trying to rebuild would be built into a teenager and not a child and teenagers were. She didn't know what Marcus as a teenager would be. She barely knew what Marcus at 10 was. She had a lot of catching up to do. The lawyer, she said, the one you mentioned. Sandra Park, James said. Post-conviction relief, wrongful conviction, appellate work. She's good. She'll tell you honestly if there's something there. And if there isn't, then you know, he said. And you deal with what's actually there instead of what might be there. She nodded, dealing with what was actually there. She'd been doing that for 7 years. She was good at it. Marcus, she said. James looked toward the living room. He doesn't talk about you much, James said. Not because he's not thinking about it, because he's learned that thinking about it out loud doesn't produce anything. She flinched. Small. She controlled it, but it was there. That's not, James started. No, she said. It's true. Don't soften it. He looked at her. He drew that woman in the doorway for months, he said. 30 pages of sketchbooks. I counted once. He didn't know who it was. He just kept drawing her. She thought about 30 pages. Every month she'd written a letter. Every month he'd drawn a doorway with a woman in it. Neither of them had known about the other. The letters, she said. The 84. I need to decide what to do with them. James was quiet. What are the options? He said. She thought about it. I give them to him, she said. All of them. Let him read them if he wants. Or, I keep them, she said, and I tell him what was in them, in person, over time. Which one is for him? James said. And which one is for you? She looked at him. It was the right question. The letters were for her. She understood that now had been for her all along. The monthly proof that she was still his mother, even when she couldn't be his mother. The record she'd kept for herself, because keeping it was the only mothering available. Giving them to Marcus wasn't giving him something he needed. It was giving herself absolution she hadn't earned yet. I keep them, she said, for now. Okay, he said, and I tell him, she said, when he asks. What I was thinking, what I was doing, what the 7 years looked like from inside. Has he asked yet? No, she said, he will, James said. She knew he was right. She knew it because she knew her son. Not the 10-year-old, not yet. But the 3-year-old she'd raised for 3 years, and the 10-year-old was built on that foundation. And the foundation had always included questions. Marcus had asked questions before he had the words for them. Had sat in his high chair and looked at her with an expression that said explain this long before he could say the words. He would ask. She would answer. That was the work. James, she said. He looked at her. Why is Marcus here on Fridays? She said. The real reason. He was quiet. The real reason, he said, is that I was 8 years old when my father left and I spent 11 years wanting someone to show up on Fridays. Someone consistent. Someone who wasn't going anywhere. He paused. I can't give Marcus his mother back, but I can show up on Fridays until she can. She looked at the living room. At Marcus on the floor, drawing, the sketchbook filling with lines that were this morning, this kitchen, this table. She looked at James. He's lucky, she said, that you were here. I'm lucky the program exists, James said. If it hadn't, I wouldn't have met him. Why does it exist, she said. The program. The real reason. He smiled. The first smile she'd seen from him. 6 kids in a hallway, he said, on a Tuesday. She understood. Not the full shape of it. She was missing too much context. Too many Tuesdays and Thursdays and Friday nights. The accumulation of small moments that had made Marcus feel safe enough to fall asleep on a couch in a house that used to be hers. But she understood the principle. You showed up. You kept showing up. Eventually, thus, showing up became the thing. She looked at the porch light through the window. Still on. Marcus said you leave it on during the day, she said. Yes, James said. Why? He was quiet for a moment. So people know someone's home, he said. She looked at him. At the man who had bought her house and left the light on and spent 8 months showing up for her son on Tuesdays and Thursdays and Fridays, who had opened the door this morning, who had said, come in, there's coffee. I need to call my case manager back, she said. Patricia. She's expecting me Monday. I know a transitional housing program, James said. On Presbury Street, 2 blocks from the community center. Women coming out of incarceration. It's not the shelter, it's an apartment. Small, shared, but an address, she said. An address, he said. She looked at the living room. At Marcus. He'd looked up from the sketchbook. He was watching them. Not pretending not to, just watching, openly, the way he'd watched her from the staircase that morning, trying to read the room. She looked at him. He held up the sketchbook, turned it toward her. The drawing of the kitchen, the table, 2 figures, the window with the morning light. In the corner, small 2 words. Still here, she looked at her son. He looked at her. Still here, she said. He nodded, put the sketchbook down, picked up his pencil, kept drawing. Sandra Park called back on a Wednesday. Mia was at the Presbury Street apartment when the call came. 3rd floor, 1 window facing east. 2 beds, 1 dresser, a kitchen she shared with a woman named Rhonda, who worked nights at a hospital laundry, and who had been out of Jessup for 14 months, and who had left a note on the kitchen counter the first morning that said, coffee's made, don't touch my creamer. Welcome. She'd been there 4 days. It wasn't much. It was an address. I read through what you sent, Sandra said. The case file, the public defender's notes, the evidence inventory. And, Mia said, there's something there, Sandra said. Not a guarantee, but something. Mia sat down on the edge of the bed. The chain of custody on the evidence, Sandra said. There are gaps. Documented gaps. Not something we have to argue, something that's in the record. Your public defender flagged it in her notes, and didn't have time to develop it before you took the plea. She told me to take the plea, Mia said. I know, Sandra said. She wasn't wrong given what she had and how much time she had. She was working with 47 other cases that month. I looked it up. 47 cases. Mia thought about that number. 47 people. All of them with the same 48 hours. All of them making decisions in a window that wasn't designed for good decisions. What does it look like? Mia said. If you file. 6 months minimum before we get a hearing, Sandra said. Could be longer. Could go nowhere. I want to be honest about that. The gaps in chain of custody are real, but a judge has discretion in how to weigh them. A pause. But if it goes the way I think it could go, the conviction gets vacated. You'd still have the arrest on your record, but not the conviction. Not the conviction. She knew what that meant practically. What it meant for apartment applications, job applications. The specific, heavy door that a felony conviction held permanently shut. What does it cost? Mia said. James is covering it, Sandra said. I didn't ask James to do that, Mia said. I know, Sandra said. He called me before you did. She sat with that. She looked at the window, east-facing. Morning light the same quality as the light through the landing window at Fulton Avenue. The light Marcus had grown up with. The light she'd grown up next to, Baltimore in the morning, doing the thing it did, regardless of who was watching. Tell him I'll pay him back, Mia said. He'll say you don't have to, Sandra said. Tell him anyway, Mia said. She saw Marcus on Tuesday. Gloria drove him to the community center at 4. James was there, not running the program that day, just present, the way he was present, which was to say he was doing something in the corner that meant he was available without being in the way. Marcus came in and saw her and stopped, then walked over. Sat next to her at the table, opened his sketchbook. They sat like that for 20 minutes. Him drawing, her watching him draw, neither of them saying much. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the specific quiet of two people who were learning each other's rhythms and had decided, without discussing it, that learning was better done through proximity than through conversation. I'm staying, she said, at a place on Presbury Street. He looked up. How far is that? He said. 8 blocks, she said. He went back to drawing. That's close, he said. Yes, she said. He turned the sketchbook toward her. A street, row houses, a figure walking. Is that me, she said. It's whoever's walking, he said. I don't know yet. She looked at the figure. It was moving towards something. You couldn't see what. The drawing ended before the destination, but the figure was moving. That was clear. Okay, she said. He turned the book back, kept drawing. Mom, he said. She looked at him. The letters, he said. James told me there were letters. She looked at James across the room. He was looking at a clipboard and very carefully not looking at them. She looked at Marcus. Yes, she said. 84. 1 a month. He processed that. Can I read them, he said. When you're ready, she said. They're yours. They were always yours. I just didn't know how to get them to you. He nodded. Not today, he said. Not today, she agreed. He went back to drawing. She watched his hands move across the page. Her hands, she could see it now, the same shape, the same way of holding a pencil slightly too tight. She'd held pencils that way her whole life. Had never known where it came from. Now she thought, maybe nobody, maybe just them. Marcus, she said, he said, not looking up. I'm sorry, she said, for being gone. He kept drawing. She waited. I know, he said, not, it's okay, not, I forgive you, I know. The most honest thing he could give her. She took it. James asked her the question on a Thursday, not at the house, at the community center on Presbury Street, after the program had ended and the kids had gone home, and the room had that particular quality of recently vacated space. Chairs pushed back, crumbs on tables, the ambient warmth of 30 people having been somewhere, and now not being there. Mia had started volunteering, not because James had asked, because she'd been at the community center on a Tuesday to see Marcus, and had watched a staff member trying to manage 6 kids doing an art project while simultaneously answering a phone, and had stood up and taken the phone without being asked and handled the call, and then sat back down, and the staff member had looked at her and said, "Can you come Thursday?" She'd come Thursday. She was good at it. Not surprising, she'd been managing complexity in constrained environments for 7 years. Managing 6 10-year-olds doing an art project while someone needed to be on the phone was, comparatively, manageable. James had watched her for 3 Thursdays before he asked, "What do you need?" he said, "to not go back." She looked at him. Not what do you want, not what would help. What do you need to not go back? The question assumed she understood the risk, that she didn't need it explained, that she was capable of answering it directly. She appreciated that. The conviction, she said. Sandra's working on it. That's the biggest thing. The record follows me everywhere. Besides that, he said. She thought about it honestly. Work, she said. Real work. Not transitional employment that disappears after 6 months. Something I can build on. What can you do? He said. She almost said, I don't know. The reflex of someone who'd been told for 7 years what she couldn't do. She stopped herself. I can manage things, she said. People, logistics, competing priorities. I did it in there. Not officially, not with a title, but it's what I did. She paused. I'm good with kids. You've seen that. I have, he said. I understand what they're carrying, she said, not theoretically. I know what it looks like when a kid has learned to need less, because needing less means being disappointed less. I know what it looks like when they're performing fine, because performing fine is the only option they think they have. James looked at her. Marcus, she confirmed, and me at his age. And probably you. He was quiet. The program, she said. You have 34 kids. How many staff? 3, he said. 2 part-time. She looked at the room. At the chairs pushed back, and the crumbs on the tables, and the drawings pinned to the wall. The week's work, 34 kids worth. Everything from careful architectural renderings to one drawing that appeared to be a dog wearing a suit, which she'd been told was Marcus's, and which she'd been told he was very serious about. You need more, she said. I know, he said. Someone who's been through the system, she said. Not as a credential, as a reality. These kids know the difference between someone who understands and someone who read about understanding. Yes, he said. I'm not asking for a job, she said. I want to be clear about that. This isn't a pitch. I know, he said. I'm asking anyway. She looked at him. The housing program, she said. Presbury Street. It's good, but it's transitional. 90 days and then I need to find something permanent. She paused. Permanent housing with a felony conviction is hard, he said. The word I was going to use was impossible, she said. But hard is more accurate. Hard means there's a path. There's a path, he said. The 12 properties on Fulton. Affordable housing designation. I control tenant selection. She looked at him. I'm not offering you charity, he said. I'm offering you a lease. Same terms as every other tenant. You pay rent. It's just, you qualify and I control who I rent to, and I'm choosing to rent to someone who just got out and needs an address. And if Sandra's motion goes nowhere, she said, I still have the conviction. You'd be renting to a felon. I know what I'd be doing, he said. She was quiet. She thought about the conversation she'd had with Patricia on Monday, the next steps, the list of resources, the specific narrow path that the system had laid out for her, the path that was real and necessary and that was also, if she stayed on it and nothing else changed, going to produce a version of her life that was survivable, and not much more than that. Survivable. She'd survived 7 years. She was done surviving. The work, she said, at the program, what would that look like specifically? Thought about it. Program coordinator, he said, running the day-to-day, scheduling, staff management, family communication, the stuff that falls through the cracks between the program director and the kids. He paused. It's not glamorous. I don't need glamorous, she said. It's real, he said. Benefits? She said. Health, dental, he said. 32 hours a week to start. She did the math. The math produced a different answer than it had produced for the last 7 years. Not a comfortable answer. Not an easy answer. But a different one. The kind that left room for the next thing instead of consuming everything just to stay in place. Marcus, she said. What about him? James said. He's at Gloria's, she said. That's right for now. I know I can't just take him. That's not how it works, and it shouldn't be how it works. She paused. But if the conviction gets vacated, if I have stable housing and stable income, and I can show the court something real, then you petition, James said, for custody. How long, she said. Realistically, he said. A year. Maybe 18 months. She looked at the wall, at Marcus's drawing of the dog in the suit. She'd asked him about it Tuesday. It's a lawyer, he'd said with complete seriousness. Dogs make good lawyers because they don't lie. She'd laughed, the specific laugh, the one that only came out when Marcus did something that was simultaneously alarming and perfect. She'd heard it, coming out of her. Still there. Okay, she said. James looked at her. Okay the job? He said. Or okay everything? Okay everything, she said. One thing at a time, starting with the job. He nodded, not with relief, with the specific contained acknowledgement of someone who had offered something real and had it accepted and understood that the accepting was the beginning, not the resolution. Monday, he said. 9 a.m., I'll introduce you to the staff. I'll be there, she said. She stood up. She looked around the room, the chairs, the tables, the drawings on the wall. 34 kids worth of a Tuesday afternoon, still visible in the arrangement of things, in the crumbs, in the dog wearing a suit. She thought about Marcus at 3 years old. 4 steps and sitting down hard, looking up at her with pure offense. She thought about Marcus at 10, writing, still here in the corner of a drawing. She thought about the 18 months between now and custody. 18 months was a long time. It was also, she did the math, shorter than the time Marcus had spent learning to live without her. That felt important. Not as comfort, as information. He'd learned to live without her. Now they were both going to have to learn something harder, to live with each other again. Starting Monday, she was there at 8:47, not 9. 8:47, because showing up early was the only way she knew how to show up, and because she'd been awake since 5, and the walk from Presbury Street to the community center took 11 minutes, and she'd timed it twice already. The door was unlocked. James was inside. He looked at the clock when she came in, looked at her, said nothing about the time. Coffee's in the back, he said. Staff gets here at 9. She got coffee. She stood at the window that faced the street and watched Baltimore wake up. The corner store pulling back its gate, a woman walking a dog that was too large for the leash it was on. A school bus moving through the intersection with the particular slowness of something carrying something important. She thought about her first morning at Eastern Correctional. She'd stood at a window then too. Different window. Smaller, higher. The view a parking lot and a fence. She'd stood there and understood, in the full weight of the word, that she was not leaving for a long time. This window was different. This window she could walk away from. The staff arrived at 9. 2 women, Deshawn, who ran the art component and who was 26 and had grown up 4 blocks from the community center, and who shook Mia's hand with the directness of someone who had been told about her and had decided to form her own opinion, and Carol, 53, who handled family communication and who had been doing this work in various forms since Mia was in middle school, and who looked at her for a long moment before saying, "You start Tuesday. Today you just watch." Mia looked at James. He was looking at the clipboard. "Listen to Carol," he said. She listened to Carol. The kids started arriving at 3:30, not all at once. In the specific, staggered way of children coming from different schools on different buses, some dropped off by foster parents, some walking alone, one arriving on a bicycle that was slightly too small for him and that he locked with elaborate seriousness to the rack outside. She watched from the corner. Not invisibly, Carol had introduced her to each kid as they came in. "This is Mia. She's going to be working with us." Simple. No history. No explanation. The kids had looked at her with the assessing attention of children who had learned to assess adults quickly and had developed accurate instruments for it. She'd looked back, not performing warmth, not performing authority, just present, available, there. Marcus came in at 3:52. He saw her and stopped in the doorway the way he'd stopped on the staircase 2 weeks ago. Then he walked to his usual table and sat down and opened his sketchbook. He didn't say anything. She didn't either. At 4:15, a girl named Amara, 9 years old, sat down next to Mia and said, "Are you Marcus's mom?" Mia looked at her. "Yes," she said. Amara considered this. "He said you were coming back," Amara said. Mia looked across the room at Marcus, who was drawing and pretending not to hear. "He told you that?" she said. "Last month," Amara said. "We were doing the building project and he said his mom was coming back. And I said, 'How do you know?' And he said, 'I just do.'" Mia looked at her son, at the back of his head, at his shoulders, the set of them, her shoulders. She could see that now, the way he held tension in the same place she held it. She was going to learn all of it. Every held tension, every almost smile, Everything he drew when the conversation got too large to sit inside of. She had time. Not all the time, 18 months to custody, and custody was not guaranteed. And even if it came with a 10-year-old who had built a life without her and would need to rebuild it to include her, and that was not fast work. But she had time, more than she'd had 2 weeks ago. He was right, she said to Amara. Amara nodded, like this was obvious. Like of course he was right. Like the only question had ever been when, not if. She went back to her drawing. At 5 o'clock, James gathered the kids for the end-of-session check-in. He did it the same way every time, not formally, not with a circle or a prompt, just, what did you make today? Show me one thing. The kids held up drawings, half-built models, a poem written on a napkin, the elaborate key fob one kid had been weaving for 3 weeks. Marcus held up his sketchbook, open to a drawing she hadn't seen him make. The community center, the tables, the kids, Mia in the corner, not centered, not prominent, just there, in the corner, the way she'd been all afternoon. Present. James looked at the drawing, then at Mia. She looked at the drawing, at herself in the corner of her son's sketchbook, present in the background of his afternoon. It was the most she'd hoped for. It was exactly right. 2 months later, Sandra Park called. The hearing scheduled, she said, March 14th. Mia wrote it down. She was at the community center desk, the coordinator desk, the one with the family contact binders and the schedule and the stack of permission slips that Carol had left with a note that said, "These need to go out by Wednesday. Don't let Deshawn do them. She staples wrong." She looked at the date she'd written, March 14th. She looked at the permission slips. She picked up the stapler. She thought about what Sandra had said when they'd first spoken. It might not go anywhere, but something's there. Something was there. She'd been finding that lately. Small somethings, in the gaps between the things she'd expected to find nothing in. Marcus laughing at his own drawing. An involuntary laugh, the kind that surprised him. Rhonda leaving coffee made every morning, the creamer on her side of the fridge. A boundary that was also its own kind of welcome. Deshawn asking her opinion on the art curriculum and actually listening. Carol saying good call when Mia had handled a difficult parent call without being asked and had handled it right. Small somethings. She stapled the permission slips. Deshawn had been right about the stapling. There was a right place, and Mia had figured it out on the third one. She put them in the folder. She picked up her phone. She texted Marcus. Permission slip in your folder. Don't lose it. 3 seconds. I know, Mom. She looked at those 2 words. I know, Mom. No comma. The way kids texted. I know, Mom. Both a statement and an address, both I know and Mom, collapsed into the same breath, the same 3 words. She put the phone down. She picked up the next thing on the list. She got to work. The hearing was on a March Tuesday. Mia wore the jacket 2 sizes too big for the last time. On the way back from the courthouse, she stopped at a thrift store on North Avenue, bought a navy jacket for $14, wore it out of the store. The conviction had been vacated. She stood on the courthouse steps and called Marcus. He picked up on the second ring, school hallway, lockers, someone laughing at something. Mom, he said, I'm at school. I know, she said. I just wanted to tell you something. What? I'm still here, she said. A pause. I know, he said. She could hear him smiling. Go to class, she said. I'm going, he said. He hung up. She stood on the steps in a jacket that fit. Then she went back to work. That evening, Marcus came to Presbury Street. He looked at the room. The window, the small kitchen, the way she'd organized it, everything in its place, the habit of 7 years not yet broken. He went to the window. James says maybe September, he said. If everything goes right, that's what Sandra thinks too, she said. He turned around, looked at the fits, he said. Yes, she said. It does. He sat on the floor with his sketchbook. She sat next to him. He drew, she watched. Across the city on Fulton Avenue, the porch light came on at dusk. Automatic. Reliable. James went upstairs. He moved his father's photograph next to his mother's on the desk, both of them where he could see them. He went back downstairs. Checked the porch light. Still on. He left it on. If this stayed with you, subscribe if you're new, share it with someone who needed it today, and tell me, who came back for you? Or who are you still waiting for? I read everyone. See you in the next story.